Chapter 3 Ash. Ash stood straight and attentive at King Ingemar's side. He coughed and spluttered, wiping mucus onto a red serviette. Its stench was repulsive. She took it reluctantly, trying her best not to appear disgusted. She disposed of it and rushed back to his side. "Father, you should rest. Why do you insist on dining with us when you can barely breathe?" Princess Serene said. "Too stubborn and proud," the Wild Queen said. She gulped dark red wine from a crystal glass. "More!" she demanded. Tilly hastened to give her more wine. Deep reddish-purple wine rose in the crystal glass with the satisfying sound of liquid being poured. The Wild Queen was named as such because it was thought to be more suitable to call a queen wild than crazy. Ash's mother was the queen's personal maid, and it seemed to Ash she was the only person to have compassion for the queen. The king grunted and waved his hand. He didn't approve of the conversation. His beard was grey and long, and his hair was thin. His body was skinny and deteriorated. Such a feared man, yet so fragile, Ash thought with hatred for him. The king was cruel and had no respects for servants or anyone. Prince Gideori, his son, youthful and strong, was a powerful witch like his father was said to have been when he was younger. Gideori said, "Fear not, father. I will respectfully represent the family and the kingdom at the Goanna wedding." The royal family of Audiobook had recently received an invitation to the Goanna wedding. The wedding would unite the daughter of the minister of Avenia with the son of a mining mogul, and it seemed to be the focal point of palace gossip. Ash had noticed tensions in the witch's words in recent days. The king grunted. "What do I care about giants?" Uncontrolled black and red mucus seeped from his mouth onto his grey beard. Though they didn't state it publicly, it was clear that the witches of Audiobook didn't like the idea of powerful giant families uniting in Midvale. Ash pulled a serviette from her pocket and held her breath, wiping. Flash! Stone floor, confusion. The king had struck her. Aching cheek, aching elbow and hip. "Did I give permission to approach me?" the king said. Ash dragged herself to her feet, seething. Through clenched teeth she managed, "Your Majesty, I apologize. You did not give me permission to approach you. I acted impolitely." The last time the king had drooled on himself, he had hit her when she had asked for permission to approach, saying she should have cleaned it up right away to maintain his dignity. "I wish he would just give up and die," she thought. The thought was wrought with guilt because she knew that a small part of her really meant it, though most of her wouldn't wish death on anyone, not even witches and giants. "Well," the prince said, "attend your king." "May I approach your Majesty?" "Get on with it," the king grunted. Ash did as she was told. The mucus smelt like death itself. It was no wonder the family wanted their father to stay in bed. Nobody would want to eat with that smell invading their senses. It was so harsh, she could barely think clearly when she got a strong whiff of it. "Father, you see, once Tora Goanna marries Nara Darthik, you could say the ministry and military are married to all the mining in Avenia. That level of influence is somewhat unprecedented in the Nine Lands, and I need to nurture our relationship with the giants to make sure we can make the most of it," the prince said. Prince Gideori was charming on the outside and most cruel and narcissistic on the inside. "Did you not hear me, boy?" The king backhanded his silver goblet, and it flew across the table, red wine covering everything. "I do not care about giants," he grunted. Ash and Tilly rushed to clean the table. Supper time had been much like this for months. Ash would have been more satisfied with the family's suffering if it hadn't meant that they would take most of it out on the servants, which, of course, they did at every opportunity. Princess Serene was the only one who didn't treat them awfully. This whole time she had sat quietly and rigidly, seemingly deep in thought, away in her mind. She was often like that around her family, which was interesting because she was vibrant when she was alone with Ash. The kitchen servants placed silver tray upon silver tray of delicious and delightfully presented food on the table. A whole roasted bird, surrounded by all sorts of brightly coloured vegetables, grapes, olives, and cheeses, and more wine. The family picked at it ungratefully, while Ash's mouth watered. The king's disgusting scent found her and reminded her that not everything in life is as it seems, no matter how privileged one might be. The king tore into a leg of chicken, and the fat splattered and dripped onto him. He stuffed a tomato into his mouth, and it squelched as his teeth broke its skin, red juice spitting a distance onto the table, and the rest dripping through his beard. He coughed and choked, clearing his throat and spitting into another serviette. The king's family looked at him with shame and sadness, and the air was filled with sorrow. Ash wondered what the city would think if they knew how glum nights at the palace had become for the rulers of Ulmirin. Something seemed off to Ash, and it wasn't just the king's deterioration. But she couldn't put a finger on it. She examined the room. The creamy sand-coloured stone, the intricately carved patterns repeated throughout the stone with precision, the red, orange, and yellow and white mosaic-tiled floor, the lanterns with their detailed filigree metalwork and magic honey-yellow glow, the rare charms and herbs and runes and artifacts. Now that she came to think of it, it all appeared somewhat busy and chaotic. She had never seen it that way before. Until then, she had always considered the palace to embody the ultimate sign of power, wealth, and magic. The prince looked beyond his father to Ash and smiled creepily at her. She cringed, and an indescribable sickly feeling filled her. He had begun taking a fancy to her, and she feared where it would lead. The prince was known to like young servant girls and boys. Humans and witches were forbidden to reproduce together, so she would be forced to drink womb rot potion and become infertile. The experience was said to be worse than being plunged into the underworld. She didn't want to think about it. I wish he would die too, she thought. I wish they would all die. Guilt. Perhaps not Serene. She doesn't quite deserve to die. Princess Serene chewed her food slowly, her eyes still glazed and not paying attention to the supper. The wild queen downed more wine. The king's energy was spent, and he could barely keep his head up. The main course was removed from the table, and desserts were placed upon it. Prince Gideori took a slice of apple drizzled in cream and honey, with lilac petals, and he winked at Ash as he slowly wrapped his lips around the apple. He was a handsome man, yet repulsive. I wish that apple was poisoned. I wish he would die. The prince licked and sucked the cream off the apple slice. Ash found herself still watching, slightly mesmerized, as if in a light trance, and thinking, I wish the apple was poisoned. I wish the apple was poisoned. The prince bit into the apple, chewed it, and swallowed. Nothing. And even though Ash knew it was impossible for her to do magic, she was still disappointed. One day I'll get some poison, she thought. One day soon. A horrific groan, a scream of intense pain, shock and silence, except for the snoring king whose head had drooped as far as his neck would let it. Then another scream as the prince grabbed at his throat and his stomach desperately. He became grey and yellow, and black veins showed through his skin. Impossible. Ash thought, amongst all the commotion of servants and family members now frantically attending to the prince who writhed and convulsed and screamed in pain, as if his body was battling a demon. "He has been poisoned! My son has been poisoned!" the queen screeched madly. "Lock the palace down! Nobody leaves!" A guard rushed off to obey the order. The queen screamed, "Put these servants in the dungeons! They have poisoned my son! They are all going to pay for this!" she sobbed. "Call the healer! Quickly!" The princess said calmly to a guard, "They are innocent until proven guilty. Remember that." Tears dripping down her cheek, she crouched over her brother, who was stiff as a rock, and she began an incantation. A strong guard grabbed Ash so forcefully her neck whipped backwards, and before she could find her feet, he dragged her through the great hall and gallery down to the kitchens, past the armoury and servants' quarters, out through the courtyard and down a rusty ladder and into the dungeons. She wanted to protest, to say she had done nothing wrong. "Did I? It's not possible," she thought. The guard threw her into a dark, dingy cell. It was damp and stuffy, and it stank. A shadow moved. She flinched. Her eyes adjusted. It was a bony old man sleeping in the corner. Tilly and the kitchen servants were thrown in soon after. The cell felt crowded. The gate clanked shut, and the guards left. They stood in silence, in shock and disbelief. Tilly began to sob. "They're going to execute us, aren't they?" "Whoever did it must own up to it," Stefan said. "You're the cook," Molly said. "You prepped all the food. It must have been you." "Hang on a minute. I didn't do it. There's no way I'd have done it," Stefan said. "It couldn't have been me, could it? It must be a coincidence. It must be. You can't wish poison into an apple." Ash decided she wouldn't say anything. It was too absurd to think she could have done it. Molly said, "You went with the prince to Narrated. We all know they hate the North. They put you up to it." "Don't be so ridiculous. They monitor everything coming into the palace. How could I have got poison in? It must have been one of the guards," Stefan said. "I wouldn't ever poison the prince." He was desperate and angry. "The guards never touched the food," Molly said. "You did it." She trembled as she spoke. "Shut up!" Ash screamed. Her voice cut through the dungeon, and an eerie silence followed. Fear and uncertainty filled the air, an uncomfortable horridness she wished she could run from. It wasn't long before a guard came and unlocked the gate and grabbed Stefan. "You're first," he said. "All we want to know is who put you up to it. That's it. You can make it easy for yourself." "But I didn't, please." Stefan's feet flapped and scraped and jarred against the stone floor as he vainly tried to resist being dragged out. "What'll they do to him?" Tilly said between sniffles and sobs. Ash shook her head as if to say, "I don't know, and I don't want to know. Neither do you." The old man in the corner scraped himself awkwardly and weakly into a seated position, his back against the rough rock lining the cell. His eyes were whitish-grey and blazed throughout. No pupil, no iris. He grinned, showing only a few teeth, and said, "The rule of witches will unravel to the essence of truth, the prophecy." His eyes glowed white, and he pointed at Ash. "You," he said, "when the darkness and chaos come for you, dance. Don't run." His eyes dimmed, and he rested his head back against the wall, muttering to himself. "Dance. Don't run," he whispered. "Dance. Don't run." "Nutter," Tilly said nervously, and then the screaming started. Stefan's screams and groans and cries stretched across eternity, and every change of tone and pitch and length in each scream spoke of a new torture. The screaming stopped. The silence was unbearable. Each moment of silence a moment closer to their turn. The screaming started again, weaker, yet more desperate, more unbearable silence. Ash felt vomit surge through her, and she instinctively swallowed the first clump because being sick on palace grounds was forbidden under all circumstances. And then she remembered she was in a cell in the dungeons and she was sick everywhere. Her stomach stung and her throat throbbed, and her mouth was left with a sour taste. She salivated heavily. The smell was sickly and sharp. They came for Molly next, and her screams were twice as horrid. It was impossible to tell how much time had passed and how long Stefan and Molly had endured their tortures. Time was irrelevant. More suffering had been dealt than a person should have suffered in a lifetime, and Ash's blood boiled with fury and despair. Ash and Tilly were dragged to the torture rooms together. The guards had clearly become impatient, and they must have wanted to get it over with quickly. There was blood everywhere. So much blood, all over 2 tables and the floor. There were potions and powders and herbs in vials, and surgical implements of all types. The low light from only 2 little lanterns made it feel all the more sinister. Tilly fought and screamed as they strapped her to a table. Ash lay on the other table without a fight. The guard guided her hands into the straps and fastened them. Her legs were bound next. They cut off her clothes. A guard turned her head and pinned it to look at Tilly. "You'll watch each other squirm until one of you talks," he said.
"Girls," a crooked voice said, "I am the interrogator."
He was an old man, and he appeared fragile and feeble, yet there was a wrongness about him that spoke of evil. The way his bones were shaped, his posture, his skin. He looked as if he dined on suffering.
"This can be a lot easier for you if one of you simply tells us who it is that wants the prince dead." "It is impossible for a servant to gain access to a poison as powerful as that with which the prince was struck. No, this is a more serious matter than a rebellious servant, and we think one of you knows exactly what we need to find out."
"We don't know," Ash said firmly.
"Somebody knows. These things do not happen by chance, do they?"
"It could have been one of the guards." She couldn't stop trembling, no matter how hard she tried to calm herself. The guard holding her head banged it against the table. White flash. Pain.
"Oh, of course," the interrogator said. "If we have to interrogate the guards, we will."
He took a vial of black powder from the wall and pulled out the stopper.
"I think I will start with her. She seems more susceptible."
He poured the black powder into Tilly's mouth, and she wriggled and struggled as the guard held her down.
"No hope in struggling, dear girl," he said, soothingly, in a way that chilled the damp air. "Even the slightest dark root powder in your blood will conjure all sorts of suffering in the mind and body. See?"
Tilly's body went limp for a moment. She was lifeless, and then she cried a cry that spoke of the most unbearable suffering on earth, and her eyes turned hollow and black. Something beyond pain, beyond sorrow, something so much deeper and darker. The interrogator touched her on the forehead and caressingly whispered an incantation, and Tilly calmed to a gentle, hopeless sob.
"Trust me, girl, that was just a taste of what you will feel until you tell me everything," the interrogator said.
"Please," she begged, "I don't know."
"Perhaps a little non-magical interrogation will persuade you further. It is only a matter of time until you tell me something, after all," he said.
He was measured, calm, and methodical. He took a tool, took her shaking hand, and gripped her fingernail with the tool, yanked it off. She shrieked. Ash couldn't bear to watch. She closed her eyes, but Tilly's pain invaded her mind. The shrieks haunted her. What can I do? Even if I confess, they'll kill us both to make an example. She was so confused. Her thoughts raced around in a woozy swirl, and her blood rushed loudly in her head. She felt panicked and traumatized. The interrogator tore each fingernail and each toenail from Tilly, and he seemed to enjoy every moment.
This might be painful, but it is somewhat harmless, he mused. Consider it a warm-up for the devastation to come.
He put the nail extractor down and picked up a knife.
Now, the fun stuff.
He made an incision into her stomach, and she groaned. He poured a powder into the incision, and she wailed. "Wait! Wait!" Ash said. "I did it! I poisoned the prince!" "There we go, then," the guard holding Ash said. "I knew it was her."
"Intriguing,"
the interrogator said, peering closely into Ash's eyes.
"Why exactly did you poison the prince?"
"Because I'm sick of the way we get treated. I'm sick of being a slave."
"My dear," the interrogator said, "you are no slave. You serve the magic. You serve the royal family. You live in the palace. Without us, you would be in some whorehouse or dead. Without the witch's advancements, you humans would be living in the dirt like animals."
Ash was sick of hearing it. She closed her eyes and said nothing, wishing for it all to end. The interrogator stuck his bony finger into Ash's mouth, and his taste of evil made her instinctively retch. With practiced ease, he poured a liquid into her mouth before she could react and close it. It tasted harshly bitter.
"Truth potion, incredibly hard to make, extremely rare," he crooned. "Now we will see if you really are telling the truth."
A rush of relaxation rippled through Ash's body, and she felt light and good. Her muscles felt loose and deeply relaxed. She felt warmth and well-being and detached from all the pain and trauma. Everything that had just happened seemed like a distant nightmare that couldn't affect her any more.
"Now, tell me, dearest, how did you poison the prince?"
I wished for it," Ash said. She had a vague sense that she should be minding her thoughts, but she felt so pleasant and relaxed that she couldn't care about or control anything.
"You wished for it?"
"I wished he would die. I wished the apple was poisoned."
"You are smart for a human. Games of semantics can evade the truth for some time, yet it will not help you here," the interrogator said.
He took a hammer and approached Ash.
"Now tell me why you did it, how you did it, and who put you up to it. Be very specific and very truthful, or I will crush your kneecap."
"I wished he would die. I did it because he deserved it. Nobody put me up to it. You deserve to die too," Ash said. She couldn't help herself. She didn't mean to say it. The truth potion gave her no choice.
The interrogator said.
He peered into Ash's eyes. She peered back, vague, distant, and uncaring. She only hazily noticed the revulsion churning in her stomach. He put the hammer down and pondered.
"So, you are telling me you wished the poison into existence?"
He picked up a rod of metal with a wooden handle.
"You see, If I crush your kneecap, you could become unconscious from shock. I do not want that, not yet."
He rubbed his fingers together, and a flame appeared from them. He heated the poker with it until it was red and white.
"They say fire magic is chaotic and uncontrollable. They say it makes you mad. I do not feel mad."
He pressed the poker onto Ash's bare stomach, and the relaxing and numbing effects of the truth serum instantly vanished, and her stomach seared painfully while her skin crisped and melted. She clenched her jaw, trying not to scream, trying to contain herself. It was impossible, and she screamed louder than she ever imagined she could. Her piercing howl shook the room. Glass smashed, and pieces exploded. Rock crumbled and crushed. Metal screeched and clanged. The interrogator collapsed. The table shattered. She thudded onto the ground as rubble fell on top of her.